camera, but supporting me from afar, and will help with the Q&A parts after I've given our sort of update and presentation. I suppose as anyone who has the after lunch slot, I'm hoping I will be exciting enough and interesting enough so no one nods off. At least it's not like in the olden days where people would have a massive lunch and then we'd all everyone will be nodding off. So hopefully this will be interesting and compelling enough for people so that they will have lots of questions and things that they're interested in what we're saying. So I suppose just checking in following our last fantastic presentation from our colleagues. I think it's a bit of a hard act to follow, but what I've been really encouraged around everybody who's spoken today is thinking about that idea of there being no winners and no losers, and we're certainly going to carry on in this sort of domain. So I do feel a little bit like a fraud though, because in Somerset we are dealing with some of the highest number of tribunals, definitely in the Southwest, and maybe in terms of our wider national colleagues from other local authorities. So I think I need to confess that at the start so that you don't think we're already feeling the benefit of some of the things that we are putting into place. So we've got a high number of tribunals, but I've been asked to share some of the activities we've been undertaking in Somerset to try and bring those down and resolve situations earlier. And what we're really going to focus on in our discussion today is around practice. So I've spoken regionally, certainly, about the idea of how we help practitioners to practice well. So, and you'll hear that through the things I talk about today. But just in terms of numbers, I think it's really interesting. So Somerset has a profile that's changed really significantly over the past 3 years. So this may well be felt by the local authorities, but certainly in Somerset we were recognised as a low statementing authority back in the day, and that meant that we had very low numbers of statements. And then through the past 3 years we've gone through a sort of transition process where children, young people who had high needs funding without education, health and care plans or statements have transferred into those, and you'll see just the sort of fundamental growth over the last 3 years in terms of the numbers of education, health and care plans we now maintain. I think what's really important about that is that one of the things that I'm fairly obsessed with in my role as strategic lead is just that decision fatigue sort of approach. So we take thousands of decisions. And I'm sure that's the same for all of our local authority colleagues. And I put our annual review data in because our disputes are really sort of 50-50 across assessments and annual reviews. And we're really proud in Somerset that we process and undertake amendments on a fairly high number of annual reviews. And I think I'm sure that's the same in most local authorities nationally, but I know for some keeping on top of annual reviews is a challenge. And I think a byproduct of us keeping on top of our annual reviews is that we have now 3,000 decisions on top of our decisions around issuing and assessing and issuing. So if you think about it in that context, it's not a surprise that we have more tribunals because our whole decision making is around all 4,000 plans. So we definitely have been thinking more about how we model compliancy against working in a restorative way. So I think it's really interesting hearing the idea about non-violent communication and working compassionately. And we're certainly looking at restorative approaches in order to get it right with families really from the beginning. So our sense is that it's our relationship to muck up in some expense because it's in our gift. When someone applies for a statutory assessment, often they've never come across the statutory SEND team before, and actually it's our opportunity to do it right and do it well. And sometimes the compliancy factor, particularly if you've been a low performing local authority as we had been around timeliness, coupled with 1,000 new plans a year, you can see that sometimes those two things rub up against each other. So that's something that we're absolutely focusing on. I've talked about this lots before regionally, and I'll always get a plug for it if I can at any other arena, is our SEND teams are some of the most undervalued teams probably nationally. Many of us now have large teams of professionals working in a very complex space without national standards, vocational standards, or anything that they can feel proud of and feel as though that's their job. So many of the staff I lead and manage still describe themselves as the job they once did. So we have lots of Senkos, lots of TAs, lots of people from a range of different spaces, and I think it's just really interesting if we think about what that means for every local authority has got this team, and they do not have the same respect maybe actually nationally as other teams do. So I will always plug that whenever I get a chance, and I'm always willing to help with the solution. So I think we have to really accept that capacity and volume impacts on the experience. So I think we have to be comfortable with the idea that sometimes if we've got 250 year 6 phase transfers to do in a packed period of time, we've almost got to accept that the experience for people might be challenged by our capacity to do it well. And I think that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it well. I think we need to kind of own it, a bit like when we're talking about non-violent communication, you know, that idea of going, I feel like I've got 100 children allocated to me and I'm finding that quite difficult, and I need to understand how I can do a good job of this when I've got so much to do. If you could go to my next slide, that would be lovely, thank you. So what we've done is we've worked hard on a set of practice standards. There's lots of different things we've done around quality assurance, and certainly since our SEND inspection, we've worked with our children's social care teams, and I recognised from the very early presentation we had from colleagues about dispute resolution and working with colleagues using our social care teams to understand how they set their practice standards up. They've really helped us to form our practice standards, and they're after the first iteration and they'll be reviewed 6 monthly. But really what we wanted these to do was really help define what the expectations of the role would be, but also the expectations families could have with us. So within the standards, and I'll share them with colleagues once at the end of today, I'll get them to Emma. Once you start or embark on an education, health and care assessment, what might that look and feel like for you? So how many conversations can you expect to have? What will that be like? And I think that's helped us with our induction and our supervision to really pull people back to those standards and what families should expect from us. So that helps us really with the role of the SEND officer. So thinking about what that role should be like for them and what they should be. And I think we have to acknowledge, don't we, the sort of dichotomy around being really good at the administrative bits and then also being brilliant at working with people in a way that brings them around families. And I think that is tricky. That's a tricky complexity of this job. We really focus on people, not plans. So we're quite strict. I think in my next slide, I talk a little bit about getting rid of words. And certainly I feel strongly that, and in the local authority, it's sort of well known that we don't talk about casework. We don't talk around case workers. We talk around children and plans. And to undo that in this local authority has been really challenging. But actually, we really want to talk about children, not cases. And I think that's something that has changed the way we view things in Somerset in terms of that casework role. But I still think that nationally we talk about caseworkers, and I wonder what that does around relationships and making it clear what the job is. So if you could go to my next slide, please. So our impact so far, so we have had, this has been underway for a few months so far, but the impact we're feeling is we definitely have had an increased take up of mediation. So our mediations, I think for the last 2020 calendar year, we're about 25. We're now about at about 70 for the last calendar year, and a large chunk of those have ended in us being able to come to a resolution. Mediation is a great space, but I actually think there's far more for us to do before we even get there. And that is about how we work with families and how we have relationships. And in Somerset, we love the word curiosity, so it's great to hear Barry use it earlier so frequently, because curiosity is key. And I think there's still more to do around helping our assessment and reviewing officers be curious at that first conversation with families to really understand what difference an education, health and care assessment might make to their child and what they're looking for. Because I think so frequently when we work with families at the end of the process, it's more about frustration, people not coming around families earlier, and not having a real focus on being focused on outcomes for that family and that child. So we've had an increase of mediation over the last 2 years, which has been really heartening for us. Our tribunals are now steady, so they're high, but they're steadily high. So we're not on that same trajectory of going up. And based on the number of decisions we're taking, they're high, but I'm confident part of that is because we are processing nearly 100% of our annual reviews as they come in. What is really interesting is that when we compare this year to last year, the withdrawals of tribunals at that very early stage has increased really significantly. So we're not conceding necessarily, we're just working with families to discuss what might be done. A bit like colleagues from Derby were describing earlier, I suppose, about just trying to get around and trying to work out whether we can help families with a decision we've taken and put in more support to reassure and build confidence, or that we've taken a decision that might need to be re-looked at. So I think they are equally interesting in their own way. If you could go to the next slide, please. So there's sort of the 4 things that we are going to focus on over the next 6 months is embed those practice standards across our induction, supervision and appraisal. There's lots of other things we're doing in our quality assurance arena, and I'd be more than happy to speak with anyone if you're interested in what we're doing around quality assurance. We certainly are learning a lot from doing some multi-agency practice evaluations, and that's involving our health and social care colleagues, which is really interesting. And we've got our first quite big practice evaluation on Friday around thinking about what it feels like for children and families who have had social, emotional and mental health needs before, during and after an education, health and care assessment. And some of us who are part of that multi-agency event have had the opportunity to talk to families, and it's been so fascinating about what they're telling us. So we've got lots going on in that quality assurance space, and which we'd be more than happy to talk to colleagues about. So supporting staff through observations. So Anna, who's with me today, is observing our team. We call them ROs. So we call our what would be a caseworker, an RO, an assessment and reviewing officer. Assessment or reviewing officer, supporting our no conversations. So particularly we've said no to assess. So we've had a bit of a spike in appeals around no to assess, and we absolutely think that how we say no and the support we offer to families in bringing them together with the school, for example, is really critical, and it's fairly time dependent, isn't it? So I think I've seen in the chat, if you've got members of staff with allocations of 600, then that's going to be really tricky. And I think that means it's a balance, isn't it, about how much people can do, and whether I know some colleagues have wider advisory teams that might be able to help with that. But it's definitely how we say things and how we bring families with us. One of the things that I've been saying, it's quite an annoying phrase I've started, but I can't stop saying it. And Anna will be rolling her eyes thinking, oh, here she is. Here it is again. But there's something about that leaning into the dispute. So I think the whole way that the code of practice and the regulations are set up almost encourage us to withdraw when we've made decisions. So we take a decision, we tell you what it is, we give you a right of appeal, we come backwards. And what we're saying is you need to lean into it. So once we've said no, we sort of put our arm out at the same time and go, we've said no, but we're with you. And I think that's really hard, because I think it sort of goes against what the kind of framework almost accidentally creates an ability to have disputes. So we're really keen to kind of lean into the dispute and stay closer to families when we disagree. And I think that that's something that we're really interested in seeing if the practice standards and all the other QA work we're doing helps. One of the exciting things, I think I've already mentioned it probably 3 times, is around that professionalising the workforce. So we're quite lucky in Somerset, we have quite a strong learning and development offer through a sort of in-house training department, and they are working with the higher education, with the university, around professionalising the children's workforce, and we're part of those conversations around the SEND statutory aspects of that. So I think that that's quite exciting, and certainly we'll build on the awards, the sort of level 3 and 4 awards that are out there at the moment. But I also think that it will help give credibility, confidence, and to our staff, so that they feel as though they're able to progress through into other roles in the local authority if they wanted to. I think that's all my slides, so I'm really happy to take any questions from anybody, and I'm sure Anna will pop up and help with any questions anyone's got.
Claire, yeah, it's Anne. I just noticed one comment about, but sort of saying the capacity can impact on staying close to families once a no decision has been reached, and I think you probably covered it, but I think it's what's been made, it's very clear, I think a real change, or what we're wanting to change, is it's not just down to the SEND team, that's support, and how do we make sure all other professionals in schools are engaged with that?
Sure, agreed. And also, one of the things I didn't say, but I think is an important experience for us, is that some of our families have experienced a better sort of customer experience from us when they've lodged a tribunal. And I think we mustn't ignore that. We ignore that at our peril, I suppose, that suddenly, because you've got these quite tight demands, actually what a parent is experiencing is more contact, more and more of something, and pulling that downstream, whilst complicated and challenging, it should not be ignored, because I think that certainly for us, if it's better when you lodge a tribunal, then what on earth would stop you lodging a dispute? So we're certainly reflecting on that experience for our families, really.
Fantastic, thank you both. Lots of chat happening, so probably useful to have a look through that. Lots of positive comments. If anyone's got any questions, please drop them into the chat, or stick your hand up. We can come to you. I think you've definitely stirred interest, Claire, when you were talking about professionalisation and qualification. There's a couple of questions there about is there any particular qualification that you would advocate for, or is there anything that you any specific qualifications that you would encourage staff to take?
So we've got some of our staff doing and I'm going to say it with my gritted teeth, the casework award, the NACIN casework award that exists. I'm only gritting my teeth because of the name of it. And we had felt that there was probably more that could be done in this space, but what we've decided to do is we've got 9 of our staff going through that at the moment. I just think there's more we could do collectively to professionalise that workforce, and certainly in the work we're doing with our learning and development team around the degree level programmes, we'll be looking at that sort of level 4-5 for our practitioners, and we're really happy to share that. I know that I was at a previous conference and they were hoping that might be picked up through some of the SEND review, but I haven't heard that again. So we could watch this space and see when the SEND review comes out if it mentions our very valuable, hardworking, lovely staff who are often at the really difficult part of this work we've been describing today. And someone talked about the mental health of their and well-being of their staff teams. I honestly believe that we must not underestimate that the job we're asking people to do is really, really challenging, and it's also really, really challenging simultaneously for families experiencing our teams. And I think both those things can be equally true. They're not, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard out there, isn't it? And I think if we can do anything as leaders to help improve it for people, then we must do that.
Thanks, Claire. Has anybody got similar experiences around that? Anna, do you have a question?
It was just really I just looked at one of the comments here, I think from Denise, about even if a tribunal's lodged, the aim should be still to work successfully with the family, you know, and for the best outcome of the young person. We aren't enemies. That's absolutely, you know, I think probably all of our view, and that's the way we wish to work. I would be interested in, we sometimes find that more challenging if there are solicitors involved and we're not able to liaise directly with families. I was wondering about other people's views on that.
And Naomi, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thank you. So I am I lead the solicitors team for Norfolk County Council. I have currently 7 members of staff under me. Our ethos is definitely that we do not want a hearing over this. We want to work collaboratively, we want to improve the relationship, and we want to have a good working relationship going forward. Because these families and these children, young people, are going to be in contact with local authority in some cases for the rest of their life, especially with those with significant learning disabilities and medical needs. We find a mixed response from other parties. We find some very vulnerable litigants in person, which, to be honest, could be represented. Our Send-Yes service is fantastic, and we love working with them because they do help make it better, as it were, and we can collaborate really well. Some solicitors firms are really, really helpful. There are a couple, and I won't name names, that are incredibly litigious, incredibly aggressive, and almost will fight everything and anything possible to have a day in court and to say we beat this further, and they'll also try and do costs, and it's just not appropriate. We don't want that kind of environment in this because it's damaging to everybody. And the other thing that we get is the frequent commissioning of independent assessments, and they haven't even asked the local authority for an assessment, and we'd very happily commission it and pay it. And then it's a case of, well, you failed to do X, Y, and Z, and it's that attitude which some firms of solicitors, not all of them, do perpetuate, that I agree is deeply unhelpful.
I suppose the only thing I would just add, just thinking about the kind of nature of what we're talking about today, is that I think we've all agreed that if we can just not get in that space, but in the majority of time, we're all going to be better off, aren't we? So whilst I completely take your point, and I agree that there are lots of things that are happening that are really difficult for local authorities, and as a leader in a local authority responsible for this, I probably know it more than I know it as much as everyone else does here. But I think we need to be cautious, don't we, in getting into the mix about it is really hard, and I think we've said that. But I suppose what's helpful about the conversations we've had today is about what we could all do and own differently, because we can't control those things, but we can. I think it would be really helpful if we think about the things that we might be able to do to improve that experience for families and for the staff who are working there. I think there's quite a few questions, Emma, about caseloads and workloads, the number of children people have. I'm happy to talk about how we do it in Somerset if that's helpful for people, but I don't know if it is or isn't. We took what was at the time a fairly controversial position that we don't allocate everybody all the time. So we allocate active children, so children who are under assessment, and then children who have had an annual review allocated in. And then, of course, there's a grey space where people need some help because there's a placement issue or there's stuff going on, where we would allocate an officer to pick up. Because what happens is that people think they're holding hundreds and hundreds of children, but actually those children are not actively necessarily being worked on. So psychologically for the team, it's sort of been helpful to know that they're working on active children. It isn't without its challenges, but I do think that for some local authorities with high numbers of education, health and care plans, that might be the only way you can really truthfully allocate in a kind of honest way. Because I'm guessing if you've got 600 children, allocated to you, that's going to be very challenging every day you go to work if they're all active, which I assume they're not.
Thanks, Claire. I think you've picked up that the majority of questions were around capacity and also about managing well-being of staff in those conversations. There's a question there from Hilary. What feedback from families who are not having an allocated send case officer, and how do you manage those communications?
So we have a very effective front door. So we have a contact centre that takes all of our contacts around SEND. We've funded some posts in that contact centre. So they probably manage, Anna, something like 3,000 calls for us a year, and about 75% of those calls are handled at the contact centre well, and only, therefore, my maths is not great, but 25%-ish probably.
Yep, ish.
And I come into the team, and we have a duty officer who picks those up if they're not allocated, and if they are allocated, they go to the officer who's got them. I'm saying as though that's really like easy and happens like that all the time, but that's the principle.
And what was interesting, I think, Claire, as well, what the biggest area, I think, was our schools getting used to the fact that not everyone has an allocated office.
Sure.
There. I think that was quite a learning, but I think yeah, it's just getting those communications out there and explaining the way that they can get in touch with the team.
Fab. And there's just one interesting comment from Louise Warren. I don't know if you wanted to expand on it. You were talking about a toolkit that you've produced that supports the identification of needs. I know there's a few interested in that. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so very similar to what you've been doing, we did some practice standards in Thurrock, which is the area I've just come from. As part of that, I was the nosy DCO, if you like, that got involved, but we produced a health toolkit for, just as it says, about webs of care, who's involved in that, just really supporting the SEND team to identify who they should be contacting at what time, and what good would look like, and it was really valued. And I think when you were just talking about bringing in your health and social care, I just thought, oh, that's something that obviously is really valued across the system. So I thought it would be good to share really just that additional advice and support. And we held drop-ins as well, which the team really valued, because if they had those difficult conversations that they are having, there was someone to listen at the end of and navigate that system for them.
Sounds brilliant, Louise. I expect lots of people would appreciate getting their eyes on that, I'm sure.
Any more questions for Claire and Anna? I did note that there was a little bit of interest there in just wanting to know how local areas are, or who's leading on tribunals mediations in their SEND teams. So if that is of interest, give it a thumbs up and we can do a quick poll at the end of the meeting.